What if history's most legendary warriors were actually the descendants of a civilization that supposedly ceased to exist 500 years before they appeared? Between the surging waters of the Black Sea and the Caspian lies a vast expanse of grassland where empires have risen and fallen for millennia. Here, two names emerge from the historical record, separated by centuries yet mysteriously intertwined: the Khazar Empire and the Cossack hosts. The standard historical account presents these as completely separate phenomena. Khazaria, a prosperous medieval power that adopted Judaism and vanished in the 10th century. The Cossacks, independent warrior communities that spontaneously emerged in the 15th and 16th centuries from escaped serfs and outlaws. Different eras, different peoples, no relationship whatsoever. But beneath this tidy narrative lies a puzzle that refuses resolution. Because when we examine the actual evidence, the structures, the systems, the strange continuities that official chronicles overlook, a far more provocative possibility emerges. The historical consensus presents Khazaria as a steppe empire that flourished from roughly 650 to 965 CE. Unlike neighboring kingdoms built on conquest and territorial expansion, Khazar power derived from something more subtle: mastery of trade networks. Controlling the vital river systems connecting Byzantine and Islamic civilizations with northern Europe, the Khazars extracted tribute and tariffs rather than annexing provinces. Their capital, Atil, sat strategically at the mouth of the Volga, while their influence stretched across the Pontic steppe. Then came disaster. In 965, Kievan Prince Sviatoslav launched devastating military campaigns against Khazar strongholds. Chronicles record burning fortresses and shattered armies. Within decades, Khazaria supposedly disappeared entirely from history, absorbed, scattered, forgotten. Fast forward 4 centuries. Along the same rivers once controlled by Khazaria, new warrior communities begin appearing in historical documents. These Cossacks, we're told, represented something fundamentally different: spontaneous brotherhoods of fugitives who rejected feudal authority and created egalitarian military societies on the frontier. By the 17th century, they had become indispensable to expanding Russian power, fierce fighters who guarded borders and conquered new territories. Two civilizations, clean separation, textbook simplicity. Except history is rarely this clean. The first cracks appear when examining how Cossack communities actually functioned. These were not chaotic bands of outlaws improvising as they went. Early descriptions reveal hosts operating under sophisticated legal frameworks, standardized punishments, electoral procedures for leadership, territorial jurisdictions clearly defined. Legal systems this coherent don't emerge overnight among refugee populations. They require precedent, institutional memory, established tradition. Then there's military doctrine. Cossack cavalry tactics, emphasizing mobility, strategic retreats, decentralized command, mirror precisely those attributed to Khazar armies by Byzantine and Arab chroniclers. This matters because specialized military knowledge transfers through training lineages, not spontaneous invention. How did escaped peasants, allegedly cut off from elite martial traditions, somehow replicate steppe warfare techniques identical to those practiced centuries earlier? Geographic patterns deepen the mystery. Cossack settlements don't scatter randomly across the frontier. They cluster at specific locations: river junctions, portage routes, defensive choke points. These same sites appear in medieval sources describing Khazar administrative centers and trade posts. Someone understood the strategic logic of these positions. Someone chose them deliberately. Language adds another layer. The term Cossack itself derives from Turkic roots meaning free man or adventurer. But more significant is how Turkic administrative vocabulary permeates early Cossack institutions, titles, ranks, procedural terminology that mirrors Khazar governance structures recorded in Arabic sources. Symbols present perhaps the strangest anomaly. Cossack banners and seals feature motifs absent from Orthodox Christian tradition, solar emblems, steppe animal imagery, geometric designs matching those found on Khazar artifacts excavated from burial sites along the Volga and Don. Each detail alone might be dismissed. Collectively, they suggest something unsettling, not coincidence, but inheritance. To understand what might have really happened, we must reconsider how empires actually collapse. The textbook version imagines clean breaks, the final battle, the burning capital, complete dissolution. Reality operates differently. When large political systems fragment, their components don't simply evaporate. Administrative classes adapt, military elites reposition, institutional knowledge transfers to successor structures operating below the visibility of state chronicles. Consider Khazaria's actual organization. This wasn't a rigid, centralized monarchy, but a layered system of tribute collection and military oversight, operating through semi-autonomous regional commanders and local authorities. Such structures don't require a capital to function. They're designed precisely to survive fragmentation. When Sviatoslav's forces destroyed Khazar strongholds in the 10th century, they dismantled centralized authority, the capital, the Khagan's court, the visible apparatus of state power. But destroying administrative centers doesn't eliminate the administrators themselves, the military professionals, the families who'd organized steppe governance for generations. These populations don't vanish, they disperse, embed themselves in the landscape, and preserve what they can of their institutional knowledge. This resolves multiple puzzles simultaneously. The sophisticated Cossack legal codes become explicable not as miraculous invention, but preserved custom, law transmitted orally across generations, enforced through collective memory rather than written archives. The military continuity makes perfect sense. Cavalry doctrine passed down through training traditions that never completely broke. The geographic precision reflects inherited understanding of strategic positions rather than fortunate accident. Even the religious shift from Judaism to Orthodox Christianity fits this model. Religious conversion is among the most common survival strategies for conquered elites throughout history. Faith changes far faster than administrative logic. A defeated ruling class accepting Christianity while quietly maintaining their organizational structures and territorial knowledge represents standard historical pattern, not anomaly. What we're observing isn't disappearance followed by coincidental reemergence. We're observing transformation, and defeated empire dissolving into the frontier, shedding its imperial identity but preserving its functional architecture. This brings us to the critical question. If such continuity existed, why does official history insist so forcefully on complete separation? The answer lies in how the Romanov dynasty consolidated power after the chaotic time of troubles. Centralizing authority across their vast, diverse realm required more than military conquest. It demanded narrative control. Regional identities needed standardization. Alternative historical narratives posed threats to unified sovereignty. Oral traditions preserving memories of pre-Romanov autonomy required suppression. The Cossacks presented a particular challenge. Too powerful to immediately crush, too distinct to easily assimilate, they represented a military culture that predated and contradicted Romanov absolutism. Their claims to ancient freedoms, their autonomous traditions, their resistance to centralized control, all this became dangerous once Romanov chroniclers began constructing an official Russian past. The solution was elegant: narrative surgery. By presenting Cossacks as recent phenomena, marginal people who emerged accidentally from social chaos, the state eliminated their historical legitimacy. A people without deep roots has no competing claim to authority. Simultaneously, by quarantining Khazaria as a dead civilization with no heirs, Romanov historiography severed any dangerous continuity that might challenge the dynasty's claim to be Russia's natural and inevitable rulers. This wasn't conspiracy, it was statecraft. Every empire curates its past, emphasizing certain continuities while erasing others. The Romanovs simply did what all successful dynasties do. They made their version of history feel inevitable. But narrative control has limits. It can redirect memory, but it cannot eliminate structure. And structural evidence persists. External sources strengthen this interpretation. Persian and Arabic geographers describing Khazaria between the 9th and 11th centuries emphasize its decentralized resilience, authority distributed through regional military commanders rather than concentrated in a single capital. These accounts describe exactly the kind of system that could survive the destruction of its political center by fragmenting into autonomous units. Archaeological evidence supports population continuity rather than replacement. Burial patterns don't show sudden demographic shifts. Settlement layers indicate persistent occupation of strategic sites rather than abandonment followed by recolonization. What changes across the crucial centuries isn't the population, but the labels applied to them. Perhaps most telling, early modern diplomatic correspondence treats Cossack leaders not as bandit chiefs, but as representatives of autonomous political entities. Polish, Ottoman, and Persian officials negotiate with Cossack hosts using language reserved for sovereign powers. Foreign observers, unburdened by internal Russian political concerns, recognized what domestic chroniclers needed to obscure. These were not marginal outlaws, but inheritors of an older order. The pattern becomes inescapable. Every angle of investigation, linguistic, geographic, institutional, military, points toward the same conclusion: structural continuity between Khazaria and the Cossacks, deliberately obscured by later historical standardization. What emerges from this investigation isn't a simple revelation of hidden truth, but something more complex, a demonstration of how history itself gets constructed, edited, and presented to serve political needs. The Cossacks were not spontaneous creations of the early modern frontier. They were survivors, the living remnant of a steppe governance system that adapted, decentralized, and persisted centuries beyond its supposed extinction. Khazaria didn't vanish in the 10th century. It transformed, embedded itself in the landscape, and re-emerged under a different name when conditions permitted. This matters not because it resurrects a forgotten empire, but because it exposes how thoroughly official narratives can suppress uncomfortable continuities. Power doesn't only conquer territory, it conquers memory. And sometimes the most important historical truths are precisely those that seemed too dangerous to preserve. The question now isn't whether this connection existed, it's how many other suppressed continuities still hide beneath the surface of accepted history, waiting to be recognized.